The church fellowship hall in Natchitoches, Louisiana, usually reserved for Sunday potlucks, buzzed with quiet anticipation. Tonight, the hall was packed with families, retirees, and curious locals who had come to hear Donald Trump speak. His larger-than-life presence filled the modest space, but he seemed unusually subdued, aware of the gravity of the evening. Among the crowd was 8-year-old Emma, sitting quietly beside her mother. Clutching an old leather-bound Bible that once belonged to her late grandmother, she looked out of place, not because of her size, but due to the determination in her eyes. Her mother had whispered earlier,
"You can ask him, but you really want to do this."
Emma had rehearsed her question for weeks, scribbling it in her notebook during recess and murmuring it as she lay in bed at night. Trump spoke about policies and achievements, but the energy in the room felt muted. When the floor opened for questions, adults eagerly lined up, asking about local issues and offering occasional compliments. Emma hesitated, her hands gripping the Bible tightly, but her mother's subtle nudge propelled her to her feet. As she approached the microphone, the crowd grew quieter, their attention drawn to the small girl with the oversized Bible. When her turn came, Trump looked at her, his expression softening.
"And what's your question, young lady?"
He asked gently. Emma swallowed hard, her voice trembling.
"Mr. Trump, what does God mean to you?"
The room fell silent. Trump, known for his quick responses, paused. He stared at Emma, then at the Bible in her hands, and something shifted in his demeanor. The weight of her question seemed to silence the bustling energy of the hall. Finally, Trump spoke, his voice uncharacteristically low.
"That's a big question,
He said, leaning on the podium.
and it's not one I've always had the answer to."
He glanced at the crowd, his usual confidence giving way to vulnerability.
"When I was about your age,
He continued.
my parents took me to church every Sunday. I'd sit in those pews staring at the stained glass windows, wondering if God was listening to me. My father used to say, faith is like a ladder. You climb it one step at a time.
The audience leaned in, captivated. Trump looked back at Emma.
At the time, I didn't understand. Life threw challenges my way. There were moments when I felt completely alone, even abandoned by God. But I learned that faith isn't about always having answers. It's about believing that, even when you don't see the whole picture, there's a purpose."
Emma's eyes glistened, her grip on the Bible loosening slightly. Trump's voice grew steadier.
God, to me,
He said,
is that purpose. He's the one who reminds us to keep climbing, even when the ladder feels like it's going to break.
Emma's tears fell quietly, and the crowd murmured, sensing the extraordinary moment. Trump noticed her reaction and stepped closer.
What's your name?"
He asked.
"Emma."
She whispered.
"That's a beautiful name."
Trump said with a faint smile.
Sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest to answer. Thank you for asking.
Emma nodded, her voice steady.
"My grandma used to say, God is always listening, even when we don't hear him."
Trump's expression softened.
Your grandma was wise,
He said.
and she was right.
The room seemed transformed. An older man in the back stood up, his rugged face serious.
"Mr. Trump,
He said.
do you think we're afraid to admit we're struggling with our faith?"
Trump nodded.
Absolutely. Faith isn't easy. It's messy and complicated. But that's what makes it powerful. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying, even when you don't have all the answers.
The man sat down, and a murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Emma spoke again, her voice clear.
"My grandma used to say, faith is like planting seeds. You don't always see them grow right away, but you have to believe they will."
Trump smiled, his expression tender.
Your grandma was right again. Faith is a seed. It doesn't always sprout the way we expect, but that doesn't mean it's not growing.
An older woman raised her hand next.
I lost my husband last year.
She said, her voice trembling.
I've been angry at God ever since. Is it too late to find faith again?
Trump stepped closer to the edge of the stage.
It's never too late.
He said,
Faith isn't something you lose forever. It waits for you. And sometimes it's in the quietest moments when it finds you again.
The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Around the room, others sat in reflective silence, some dabbing at their faces with tissues. Trump scanned the crowd, his tone growing firmer.
Faith doesn't always show up in grand moments. It's in the small ones. When someone lends a hand, listens when you're hurting, or asks a brave question like Emma's.
The audience erupted into applause. Trump gestured toward Emma.
This little girl reminded me tonight that faith isn't just something we talk about. It's something we live. And when we live it, it spreads.
Emma smiled faintly, her mother pulling her close. Trump's tone grew solemn.
We're living in a time when the world feels divided, but faith has the power to bring us together. It's not about being the same. It's about understanding we're all climbing the same ladder, one step at a time.
The crowd stood, clapping and cheering, moved by the evening's events. As the applause subsided, Trump leaned in one last time.
Ask yourselves what faith means to you.
He said,
Don't be afraid of the answer. Faith isn't about knowing, it's about believing. And if you found something tonight that touched you, hold on to it, let it grow, and share it with those who need it most.
As the room emptied, Emma turned to her mother.
Grandma would have been proud, wouldn't she?
Her mother smiled, tears in her eyes. She would have been amazed. The lingering message was clear. Sometimes the bravest questions lead to the most profound answers. In those answers, we find pieces of ourselves we didn't know were missing.